Welcome to the Via Stoica podcast, where we discuss Stoicism, the ancient philosophy of living the good life. I'm your host, Bryce, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Benny and Brendan. We are here to help you apply Stoic wisdom to your everyday life, no matter what the obstacle you may be facing, whether it be work stress, relationship issues, or just the general ups and downs of life. Stoicism has something to offer us all.
Welcome, everybody, to the Via Stoica podcast. My name is Benny, and I'm your co-host, and I'm joined here by Brendan. Brendan, how are you doing today?
I am fantastic, Benny. How are you doing?
Yeah, same here. I'm just trying to stay relevant here with my, on the podcast and on the social medias and everything. That's what we're all doing this for. No, we're doing this for the right reasons. We're just trying to spread the good word of Stoicism, what it really is, and hopefully that, you, the listener, can live a better life from it and from the experiences that we share and the stories and the views that we share. And I think that that's something that we want to talk about as well, right? Why is this ancient philosophy of Stoicism still relevant today, and why is it kind of making this resurgence, and how can we still use it in our modern days? What are your first thoughts on this topic, Brendan?
I guess it's going to come to no surprise to the listeners, but I do think that Stoicism is very relevant today. I think about reading meditations, and Marcus Aurelius talks about, whether you're talking about 2,000 years ago or 2,000 years from now, there's always going to be people arguing, fighting, loving, having parties, having funerals, having birthdays. We do the same human things, and we have done them for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and we will continue to do them. So I do think philosophy is always something that should be used. Knowing ourselves and how we function in the world is absolutely important. Stoicism specifically for me is obviously my flavor of choice, so to speak. And I think because of the practical nature of it, and practical applications are what we need today, because we have so many distractions, so many things that suck time away from us, attempt to steal our tranquility. And I have found personally, and of course we've seen it with our coaching clients as well, that Stoicism and the tools that it offers really gives you that peace and calm and tranquility that you need to navigate a tumultuous world. And our world happens to be that from time to time. But I do think that Stoicism is absolutely relevant today, even more so than maybe 25 years ago, because of some of the issues we've had with, kind of the eroding of some of our institutions. You have a lot of mistrust in government, a lot of mistrust in media, a lot of mistrust in religions. So, people don't have those traditional sort of places to turn to for guidance. So we're turning internally. And that is ultimately what philosophy is, turning internally to understand your place in the world and how you want to interact with it. So those are my initial thoughts, but I'll kick it over to you, Benny. I'd love to hear what you think.
Well, and it might come to no surprise that I agree with you that it's still relevant. Otherwise the Via Stoica podcast would have had a different name, and viastoica.com, we would have changed that name. But it is interesting to think about why. And I love that you brought up Marcus Aurelius, because there is actually a passage in his meditations where he just lists all these events that are happening. And I figure, like, is he talking about now? What is it? And then there's one, I can't remember the exact example, but there was one thing that's like, oh no, wait, this was, back in the day. But all of the rest, as you said, death, birth, all of these things, even the minute things that we experience now, he was already kind of describing to himself, like this is what he went through. So, and he talks about everything that has happened in the past will happen again, as has already happened for the thousands and thousands of times. So we are coming back, and they were able to describe human nature in such a great way that, modern day therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy is based on Stoic philosophy, which is incredible to think that they already had this, and, idea of the psyche and the human nature. And now we have, used scientific research to back all these things up, and experiments and all that stuff. But when I really think about what has happened, when we look at, for example, Christianity, like the religions, they have used Roman, like the Roman side, right? Seneca's view of Stoicism, and added that and incorporated that into Christian religion, into that the biggest religions in the world, they have the 4 cardinal virtues. They've added some, right? But they've also talked about, when you read those texts from a Stoic point of view, you say, hey, this is Stoicism. So I'm not sure if it's really has disappeared as much as people say, but it's already kind of filtered into a lot of the things that we've used in our modern days as we went up to the now, right? From the Roman days where Stoicism kind of disappeared, Christianity took over, and all of these things. It's still kind of there, but it is also the question, like, why is it coming up right now? Why is this Stoicism suddenly becoming more popular and feels more and more relevant? And I think you touched on a lot of good things there with, when we talked about the sense of community, right? And also the time of our life, the time that we are living in. And when I think about that, I think it's not necessarily the time that we are living in, like, for example, now, 2025 or the 21st century, but it's the time of our life that we are living in. When we are children, we don't have the responsibilities. We don't care about these things. We're kind of living free and are curious about things and more playful. But as we become adults, we start to see all these things. We get more responsibilities. You see how expensive everything is getting. That's been happening throughout the ages. It's been getting more expensive every time. That's inflation, all those things. We can talk about that. But as we live a certain part of our lives, we start to encounter the obstacles. We start to live them more consciously. So that's where we need some extra guidance, where we need some extra support, right? Because we feel that we are, life is difficult. And as we get older, we feel that we are more alone, that we have to solve all these things by ourselves. So it isn't really necessarily the times that we are living in. No, it's the time of your life that you're living in, that you really have to take on these responsibilities. And that's where you notice all these difficulties and see how difficult life is. So that's where we need that guidance. And first, we also need to see if this is, the popularity of Stoicism, if it is real Stoicism. We see a lot of people using the label of Stoicism to show, other people how to live. And it's kind of losing a sense of the philosophy where it becomes very dogmatic, or people just say like, oh, I'm a Stoic. Look at me, how strong I am, right? Especially in the manosphere. So there we have to be careful of not identifying every time we see the word Stoicism or Stoic as the philosophy of Stoicism. We really need to ask ourselves the question, what is it that we are listening to? What is it that we are reading? And then use our brain, use our, the Socratic method to see what it really is. And then we can keep it relevant and make it truly part of our philosophy of life. And that's where it stays relevant. But I think, we need it for so many reasons. And because we've seen from the ancient Stoics, you can take those texts, change Rome or Greece for the US, for New York, for Amsterdam, from the Netherlands, and you could still apply all of these things. I think that's the power of something like Stoicism and why it is still important.
Oh, absolutely. Well said, Vinny. And yeah, a couple of notes on what you said, as far as this idea of what Stoicism, what kind of Stoicism we are talking about. And there's a few things here, right? And we have an episode where we talk about Stoicism versus Broism, which is kind of like this bastardized version of Stoicism, in my opinion. But then you also have just the modern day vernacular of the word Stoic, to some people who aren't familiar with the philosophy, means things that aren't related to the philosophy, right? You stuff your emotions down, you're stone face, you show no emotion. Whereas we know that's not true for actual people who, practice Stoicism. We are very connected with our emotions. We embrace our emotions, right? So, to me though, with those things, while those are, of course, I'm not super thrilled about the fact that there is confusion, or just even around the word of what does Stoicism mean. But I think that is wonderful because it still just brings attention and awareness to Stoicism, even if it's a slightly not the exact right version. I would rather people hear about a bastardized version of Stoicism than never hear about Stoicism, because maybe they'll meander their way to the text and they'll find it in their own way. But I really love what you said about having a duty. And I always depend on Benny to remind me when duty is something that I have to have. But I do think that as you age, right, you said you talk about the age of your life, right? As a child, you have very few responsibilities. You're really just kind of becoming familiar with the world. But as you age, more responsibilities come into your life. You have more duties that you have to take care of. And I think it's very logical of you to say that you should have a framework to do that. You should have a method and way that you are interacting with the world, that you are making decisions in the world. Because if you don't have a framework, what are you doing? Like, if you don't have a method, how are you making decisions? So I think that it is a requirement now, as I'm thinking about this. This is not an idea I had before we turned this episode on, but now I'm thinking, like, as an adult, like, you kind of have to be an adult and you have to grow up, and adults have to make decisions. And if you don't have some sort of framework, right? Like you and I, and maybe some of the listeners use Stoicism as that framework, but it doesn't have to be Stoicism. At the end of the day, what I ultimately want people to do is have a framework. I choose Stoicism as mine. Maybe I augment it a little bit to fit my life, so maybe it's 80-90% Stoicism and 10-20%, me. But find your own mix of what works for you, because we need to have a framework of how we interact with the world. Because if we don't, what does Seneca say? If you don't have a direction that you're sailing, then no wind is favorable. It doesn't matter what's going on in your life and what challenges or even good things happen to you if you don't have like a direction, if you don't have a why of what's going on. So that I think the framework is really important, and philosophy in general is something that I believe all people should study, but Stoicism is the one that just has the most practical applications to me, is the easiest to act on in the moment. Whereas other philosophies to me have just been more academic, more kind of ivory tower type situations. And that's why they call Stoicism, Stoicism was the philosophy of the streets. It was the philosophy of the people. And those people 2,000 years ago were dealing with the exact same problems that we're dealing with today. Maybe they're a little different. Maybe they have a slightly different flavor. But at the end of the day, they're basically the same issues. So if Stoicism has been working for people for 2,000 years, I have to imagine it's going to keep working.
Yeah, we see examples of that throughout the centuries as well. Like one of my favorites, Michel de Montaigne, he refers to the Stoics many times. So, and I like what you said about needing that framework, right? And for me, that is kind of a philosophy of life where we all create that for ourselves. And we can use Stoicism, and people use Buddhism. And I think that's why, because Stoicism is a philosophy, right? That if you apply it right, then because it's a philosophy, you can see that a lot of people around the world have kind of tried to adhere to it, right? You can even look at certain religions as a kind of philosophy. They have a philosophical ground, right? They have a philosophical, and how it then being used, that's another debate. But you have Buddhism, right? Buddhism is also still very popular, but it might be a little bit more for me, it's just a little bit too spiritual, too out there. And I like to be a little bit more grounded. That's just my personal preference of how I like to approach these things. And Stoicism, as you said, has a really pragmatic kind of view. It shows you, like, the same thing as Buddhism, be present, but focusing on action, focus on what you can do, focus on where your control lies. And that's just something that works for me. But you can see that that's something that has permeated throughout the centuries, throughout all of these times, because it is part of what we need to do. If we stay centered in the present, we don't have to worry about the future. We just have to focus on this moment where we have our agency, where we have our responsibility. And that is something that really helps, and something that hasn't changed throughout all these centuries, because we're all dealing with the same time perspective, the life, all the things that we want in life. We have the wants and desires haven't changed. We want more. That's the basic thing of what our wants are. We want something better. We want something more. And our aversions are to not drop back, not lose those things. And once we can eliminate those from our lives, we can be more peaceful, when we can accept the present and accept just the things that are happening around us. And I think that is a really important part to look at, right? And from that philosophy of life, we can then build it. And that's something that we all have, the right, the duty to do, to build that philosophy and make it part of our own. And even when we talk about the very strong opinions about Stoicism, right, as you mentioned, even the academic side, even the dogmatic view of Stoicism is removing that. What I think is the key thing of all of this, of all these philosophies, is about thinking for yourself. And if you just blindly follow someone else's solution to living a better life, you're not doing it for yourself. It's like following a diet. Someone says, oh, you should be fasting, or you should be doing keto, or you should be doing this. You're not thinking for yourself anymore. You're just following other people. And that's really taking the importance and the the valuable aspects of philosophy out of it. You need to think. You need to apply this to yourself and ask yourself, why is this working for me? Why isn't this working for me? And then life becomes an experiment, which makes it really beautiful and great to experience. And then we feel like people need it, because a lot of people are lost, right? People are lost in the times that are changing in their lives that is changing. They don't know how to progress to those next steps, and that's where those questions can really help you progress.
Yeah, no, I love what you were just kind of riffing on there with sort of this idea of religion, philosophy. I am not a religious person today, but I did grow up going to church and doing Sunday school, and I did grow up with kind of a Christian sort of background. And I think that was some of it, like what you talked about with kind of just following something. That was something that stood out to me as a problem in religion when I started asking questions, and the answer was, well, that's what the Bible says. And I'm like, that's not good enough for me. Like, I want to go further. And that's where I feel like philosophy, religion doesn't necessarily welcome that, at least in my experience. I don't feel like religion necessarily welcomes this idea of questioning things or trying to understand it at a deeper level, because that's what you have to do. You have to question things to understand it. And I always got this feeling that was not allowed in religion. And you just kind of accepted it. This is what the preacher says. This is what the Bible says. And that's that. And then, of course, I discovered philosophy, and like questioning is kind of the core of it. So I wish that those two things were more aligned, where, I feel like religion has drifted away over the last 2,000 years from being a thing that is supposed to be spiritual, that people can depend on, to being this thing that you're like, well, you just have to follow it, and this is the way it is. Which is why, you saw 2,000 years ago, the Romans pushing philosophers out of Rome as Christianity was rising. I mean, so I just wish, I'm, I don't have a theologian in mind, but I wish someone would start combining these two things. Like, religion is fine and dandy, right? If you have that faith, but the difference between religion and philosophy is it's a faith-based thing, right? You're basing your religion on faith. The aspects of religion that can be proven and shown are philosophy, right? Like these, we discuss these things in philosophy, and we discuss how human beings interact. And yes, that is woven through all religions. But that is core of it. Like, wisdom at the core of it is who we are, is what human beings kind of grow and thrive on. So I just feel like that there's been this divide between the two, and that they've started to kind of like, it's almost like they're enemies. But if you could start to combine those two things and overlay philosophy and religion together, you would eliminate a lot of the things. Think of all the religious infighting we have across the globe. Well, because you look at the other side, you go, oh, they're not the same religion as me. We don't agree. But if we shared philosophy, if we shared the same philosophy, but maybe we just prayed to different gods, okay, we can at least see eye to eye on something. And then we just don't see eye to eye on other things, and that's fine. But I just think we've gotten so much into our little camps and our tribes, and then we don't see eye to eye. But this philosophy can kind of be that universal equalizer, right? This thing that we all kind of come to and say, look, this is wisdom. Let's just all agree on this. And then all the other things, we're all going to have differences because we're unique, and that's what makes the world interesting. But I don't know. I feel like there's something there with like philosophy being this thing that can bring people together and kind of mend bridges that have been broken. What do you think about that?
I love that, and I like how you expounded there on those parts, and as well with when we talk about something like religion, right? As you said, there's a lot of strife between the religions. If you think about this, then you're not in the same camp, and you're already kind of being labeled as bad. And when we look at philosophy, there's a lot of questioning there. That's one of the reasons why they banned a lot of philosophers, because people in power who are using their power with tyrannical ways, they don't like to be questioned, because then people start to think. And if you start to think, then you might say, hey, this is not the best way to live. So that's where I think it is important to apply that philosophy. And again, that's why I think there's a foundation of philosophy in everyone. But we just have to be able to share that curious mind, and also accept people for having a different opinion. And that's why I think something like Stoicism and philosophy in general can really help combine or connect people more. Because if we are able to ask questions without judgment, then we can find the truth. And that's pretty much what philosophy is about, to search for truth, right? That's what Socrates was looking after. And he wasn't questioning people because he felt like he was trying to prove himself right. He was questioning people because he wanted to know what was right. He wanted to know what was true. And sometimes I feel that that's kind of what is missing with all of these things that we're following. And a lot of people nowadays are moving away from religion, right? You can see that. I see that in the Netherlands. Churches are pretty much empty. A lot of churches are being used for different kinds of venues, or because the buildings are beautiful, so let's maintain them, but there's no one coming for church, so let's do something else with them. And people are losing that sense of being able to be themselves. And that's what I see. Younger generations are getting disconnected from the message from the church. And I believe that in a way, if you do it for yourself and if you feel like there's a lot of power, which I grew up Christian, Catholic as well. My parents still go to church, and I respect them for that. And they get a lot of power and strength out of it, right? Out of that faith. And that's good. But a lot of people want more. They want to question. They see that there's different things, and they want to have that autonomy and freedom. And that's where philosophy can really fill in that void. And something as Stoicism, especially in the Western societies, can give us something that is more aligned with how we think, how we feel, how we look at life, and give us a real sense of guidance and also a sense of community. We could see, this is how we met, Brendan, Bryce, and I, we met on the social media platforms on X, just talking about this stuff, asking questions and developing our thoughts and our views and our way of looking at life with one goal. And as someone who's traveled, and I'd like to hear your opinion about this as well, someone who's traveled, I've seen people all over the world pretty much working towards one goal, and that's living better, living more peaceful for themselves and for people around them. And that's what philosophy does. Philosophy asks the question, how can we live better? How can we be more peaceful for myself and the people around us? And sometimes I feel with other ways of thinking, they just remove you from that freedom of asking questions. That's what I see with a lot of young people who are feeling lost, right? They feel that the world is against them. They feel that everybody is out to get them, and that they're just alone and isolated from how they live, because they feel that their thoughts and their views of life aren't validated, because they might think different from mainstream, or they might be outcasted from, with their opinions and their actions and their way of life. While philosophy doesn't place those labels on people, and Stoicism does it. It just looks at people. How are you living? Okay, let's analyze that. Let's really see what's going on here, and how do you feel about doing this? How do you really want to present yourself, and what are your purpose? What is your purpose? What are your priorities and values? And those are the questions we should be asking, instead of telling people you should be living this way, you should be doing this. And that's kind of what ostracizing people, while Stoicism tells us to be good people, and to really fill that in for ourselves. What does that mean for us to be a good human being, to be, in my case, to be the best Benny I can be? So yeah, I think that's something that I really get from these conversations. But what do you feel like when you traveled? You've moved around a lot, and do you agree that those people have that kind of goal? And how do you see that Stoicism philosophy can help there?
Yeah, it's awesome that you brought that up. It was one of the most surprising things when I started traveling, because when I had this, because I worked towards the plan of traveling for 2 years. I had to, I started a consulting business. I had to get clients and So there was a 2-year period where I knew I was going to be traveling the world for a while, but it hadn't actually happened yet. And I was just so jazzed about, getting out. At this point I had left the US, but only very, very limitedly, once to Europe, once in Canada, once in Mexico, very limited traveling. But in that limited traveling, I learned a lot about some other cultures. And I was so excited to do that, to kind of double down on that and learn the differences between people, how it's different in different countries and different cultures. And the most shocking thing to me was, no matter where I went, whether it's, Turkey or the Netherlands or Colombia, we're all the same. Human beings are all the same. We just speak a different language sometimes, and maybe we pray to a different God sometimes. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to do what's, best for us, best for our family, best for our loved ones. We're just trying to live, like you said, a happy life, tranquil life, and I believe that Stoicism is the path to tranquility, is the way that you live a peaceful life, or at least the tools that it gives you helps you live a peaceful life. And I guess the traveling aspect and making that realization that, like, no matter where I go, we're all the same. No matter if I'm talking to a very wealthy person or a very poor person, we're all the same. And that made me realize, I think, that how important philosophy is, because I do consider philosophy to be this thing that interconnects all of us, right? This love of wisdom. Like, I can meet someone who equally loves wisdom like me, but we disagree on every other thing you can think of, and I can still have a good conversation with that person because we both love wisdom. We both want to, search for the truth. We're both trying to understand things. Like, that's someone that I can connect with, even if we might disagree on politics and religion and in our favorite TV shows and all that fun stuff. You know what I mean? Like, you still have that connection of philosophy, and wisdom is something that is so based in our core, right? It's been something that people have been trying to figure out for hundreds of thousands of years, right? Why are we here? What is the meaning of life? These sort of major philosophical questions. So to sit here and say that philosophy isn't relevant almost seems like an insane statement to make. Like, so it is so relevant. Today, specifically, I think because of the high number of influences that exist out there in the world now, because of the internet and how fast information travels and things like that, you got to have a way to turn down the noise and turn down the distractions. And that's what Stoicism ultimately does for me. And that's what I think it can do for people is, maybe this thing that we're getting really riled up about today isn't that big of a deal because it's outside of our control. But Brendan of 15 years ago used to get real upset about a lot of things that were outside of my control. And I don't do that anymore. It's not perfect. I still do it every once in a while, but I get better. I'm shaving those barnacles off little by little. And I'm making that hole of that boat just even cleaner every day. So that's what I think philosophy does for you. It helps you shave those barnacles off of your boat that are no longer needed, no longer necessary. And why carry around unnecessary, unneeded things?
Yeah, I love that, Brandon. And as we start to round up this episode, I agree. And we talked about philosophy a lot. I think that's something like if any of our listeners here would just start thinking about their own philosophy of life, just have that mental picture, like, what does the philosophy of life mean? What does that look like for me? I think that would already help so much more. And then Stoicism, why that is specifically relevant and is because of the great practices that it has. And you can go back to our previous episodes on the dichotomy of control, negative visualization, amor fati, memento mori, all of these things. It has such great tools and exercises that we can use, and we use in our coaching and help our our clients with on a weekly, daily basis, where they can use it in their lives and to apply that pause. We've named our newsletter after it. So there are some really practical, applicable solutions or exercises that Stoicism offers that are so relevant today. And I think that that's why a lot of people kind of tend to lean more towards Stoicism because it actually helps them. And that also means that you have to find the right way to apply it. Because again, we talked about the negative parts of it and also the academic sides where we just fall over words and making sure that we use the right words of, no, Epictetus said this. No, apply it to life. It's a philosophy of life that should be lived. And that's why I think it's still relevant, because it should be lived and we can live it. We can do it. We don't have to be perfect, but we can try and be better. And I think that that's the best way to look at it and why it's still relevant. What are your closing thoughts on this, Brennan?
Absolutely. I mean, my kid, couldn't have closed it better myself, but I will say that if this is something that you are thinking about, if you're looking for a philosophy of life or just wondering maybe, where to even start, we do offer free consultations on our website at viastoica.com, where you can sign up there and meet with, either Benny, myself, or Bryce, and just have a little conversation about it, and completely for free. So if you want to do that, definitely check that out on viastoica.com. We'd love to talk to you guys because, like I said, I think it's one of the most important decisions of my life was deciding that I needed a framework for myself. And Stoicism has given me that and allowed me to make decisions better, live more tranquil, more calm life. And I'm grateful for it every single day.
Thanks, Brandon. That's awesome. And thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to the Via Stoica podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and leaving a review. Your feedback will help us reach more like-minded people on the journey to self-improvement. If you want to get in touch with us or find more information, you can go to viastoica.com, your one-stop platform for all things Stoicism and living better. And remember, virtue is the only good.